All right. So the first section, the basics, I've divided up into 4 questions, right? These should be familiar to you, right? The first question, what is a constitution? Second question, what is constitutional law? The third question is why study constitutional law, right? Why are we here? And then the fourth question is how do we figure out what the Constitution means, right? What tools do we use in interpreting the Constitution, right? Okay, and we're going to take these one step at a time. So the first question, what is a Constitution? This is, you'll remember this from the first day, right? One of the main purposes of a Constitution, one of the most important things that it does is it creates a blueprint for government, right? So, every governmental institution that you can think of arises, the federal government, arises from the Constitution, right? So, this is important because it's important that you understand that this is where, Congress comes from. This is where the presidency comes from. No doubt one day, many years from now, when you're all parents, your children will come to you and they'll say, Mommy, Daddy, where do federal courts come from? And because you know that the Constitution creates a blueprint for government, you'll be able to say federal courts come from Article 3 of the Constitution. And you won't have to make up some line like other parents about, oh, well, when a mommy federal court and a daddy federal court are very much in love. No, none of that, right? Because you know that Article 3 of the Constitution creates the federal judiciary. You know that Article 2 of the Constitution creates the presidency. You know that Article 1 of the Constitution creates Congress. The Constitution serves as a blueprint for government. At the same time that it creates that government, the Constitution puts a set of rules to bind that government, right? So in the same breath that the Constitution creates government, it also puts these limitations on what that government can do, right? And we can think of these, one, as simply limits on government. We can think of these, in other terms, as just rights, right? So when we talk about you have a right to free speech, another way of saying that is it's simply the government cannot restrict your free speech. Because remember, the right to free speech doesn't mean you can just say whatever you want, right? It means that the government can't get in the way of saying what you want in most circumstances. It doesn't mean that, private actors can't get in the way. Remember, we talked about the state action doctrine, right? So remember, what the Constitution is doing here is basically, it's not only creating the government, but it's putting a set of rules to bind that government. What else does the Constitution do? It reflects our national values, right? It's a short document. If we're going to put something in the Constitution, we know that it has to be important, right? There are many things that are important to us as a country that don't find their way into the Constitution, because the Constitution is reserved only for those things that are fundamental to our national value system, right? So I'm just going to shut the door real quick. As important as things like the Super Bowl are, they haven't yet found their way into the Constitution, right? And the idea is that, because even if everyone in the country loves the Super Bowl, even if it's important to us and everybody's going to take time off and get ready for the Super Bowl and gather together, and it's a big deal for us, right? It's not as important to us as, say, free speech, or freedom of the press, or the various other rights and freedoms that you've been studying in this class, right? Because the Constitution is reserved only for those things that are fundamental to our national value system, right? So the Constitution reflects our national values. So, the 3 kind of main purposes of a Constitution, 3 things that a Constitution does that I want us to know for this class, that I want you to know for your midterm, are it creates, 1, a blueprint for government, in that it creates the government. 2, it creates a set of rules to bind that government. All right? And 3, it serves as a reflection of our national values, right? It tells us what we care about, right? Maybe what we aspire to care about, or maybe what we actually care about. But either way, it's a reflection of our national values, okay? So that's question 1. What is a constitution? The second question, right? What is constitutional law? This is familiar to you at this point, right? The idea that in this class, the definition of constitutional law that we're operating with is it's a fight over what the Constitution means, all right? Constitutional law is a fight over what the Constitution means, right? You notice how I'm saying it over and over again? This is the kind of thing that you want to repeat, highlight, star in your notes, 3rd time for charm, right? The Constitution is a fight. Constitutional law is a fight over what the Constitution means, okay? That's really important that we understand that. Here's the example that we talked about on the first day, right? Perry v. Schwarzenegger, right? We have on this side Kristen Perry with her partner of 10 years from Berkeley, California, who wanted a marriage license from the state of California to recognize her lifelong commitment to her partner. With the state of California on the other side, represented here by the governor, Arnold Schwarzenegger, right, defending the ban on same-sex marriage that Californians passed in 2008, right? And fundamentally what this case is it's a fight over the Constitution. Specifically, it's a fight over this amendment, the 14th Amendment, right? And these 2 clauses of the 14th Amendment, the Due Process Clause and the Equal Protection Clause. Now, we haven't gotten into the doctrine of what rules, are associated with these clauses. But we talked a little bit about that on the first day. The important thing to know here is that this is basically a fight over whether this amendment prevents a state from banning same-sex marriage or whether it doesn't, whether it requires a state to recognize same-sex marriage. You see? And so the state of California, right, the voters, when they passed Proposition 8, they clearly thought this does not violate the U.S. Constitution. If it did, they wouldn't have voted for it, right? So they thought this is okay, right? The Constitution says nothing about same-sex marriage. It's okay to prevent same-sex couples from getting married. That's what the folks who voted yes on Prop 8 thought. This guy, federal judge Vaughn Walker in San Francisco, right, U.S. district court judge, said that it did violate the Constitution. He said that the 14th Amendment prevents a state from banning same-sex marriage, right? So right there, that's what constitutional law is. It's a fight over what the document means. It's a fight, in this case, over what the 14th Amendment means, right? And the question, right, who's going to win this fight? As we said on the first day, this is the kind of fight that's probably going to work its way up to the Supreme Court. And in the end, the Supreme Court is probably going to decide who wins this fight, whether the 14th Amendment bans same-sex marriage or whether the 14th Amendment prevents a state from banning same-sex marriage or not, right? And you'll remember, right, because this is just a nice reminder, this is a review lecture, right, this was just decided at the district court level, right? We're saying the Supreme Court's probably going to get to decide it in the end. I want you all, for your midterm, it's important that you review the entire structure of the federal judiciary. We had a lecture on it. Yeah, Robert.
So, say the Supreme Court decides no. Does that mean Connecticut's law gets overturned?
Okay, so which Connecticut law are you referring to?
The one about same-sex marriage.
Right, so you're saying, so Robert, are folks familiar with this? The Connecticut Supreme Court 2 years ago said that same-sex marriage is okay. It doesn't violate the state constitution. And you're asking if the Supreme Court, in this Perry case, right, if it gets to the Supreme Court, you're saying if they say that Proposition 8 is okay, that it's okay to ban same-sex marriage, will that have an effect on Connecticut's law? And the answer is probably not. Right? Because really what the Supreme Court would be saying in that case is simply it's that the 14th Amendment doesn't prevent you from banning same-sex marriage. By the same token, it also probably doesn't prevent you as a state from recognizing same-sex marriage, which is what Connecticut's done. Great question. But the answer is, yeah, no, Connecticut would probably be fine under that, right? Okay, but the important thing here, right, the take-home from this slide, right, you have this actual diagram in your notes. I've handed it out. Review the federal court system. It's going to be very important to the midterm. I want you to understand how these courts interact with each other. Remember, courts start here at the trial level, they move up to the intermediate appellate court, and then if the Supreme Court wants, it will take those cases and review them as the ultimate arbiter of the final appeals. Okay. All right, so that was the second question, right? What is constitutional law? Third question, just really quickly, why study constitutional law? A couple of different reasons, right? One, so you can know your rights, right? That's a lot of what we're doing in this class, right? Understanding students' rights in schools. This was a comic that we looked at on the first day. It's actually making fun of Justice White, Byron White's decision in the Hazelwood case, which, of course, you weren't familiar with on the first day. Now you're all experts in, right? And here we see the justice who wrote the opinion in Hazelwood getting up there and talking to this class about how America's the greatest democracy in the world, right? And at the same time, all the students in the class are bound and blindfolded and gagged, right? The idea is that even as this justice who talks all this about democracy, who talks about how what a great thing free speech is, even as he talks about all those things in other cases, when it comes to students' rights, he has a very different opinion, and that's what this comic is kind of making fun of, right? This cartoon came out right after the Hazelwood case was decided. So answer one, why study constitutional law? So you can know your rights, right? Number two, right, so you can better understand history, right? This is a picture of 8 members of Little Rock 9, right? The year is 1957. This is the reaction to the Supreme Court's decision in Brown v. Board of Education, right, over the integration of public schools in the Jim Crow South. And here we see that these 9 students needed ultimately to be escorted into these schools, into this school, Central High School in Little Rock, by the 101st Airborne. Dwight Eisenhower, president at the time, had to send in the Army, literally the Army, to escort these students into schools because the resistance to their entering these schools was so great by the governor of Arkansas, Orville Faubus, by local townsfolk in Little Rock. And an understanding of constitutional law, an understanding of that constitutional fight that led to this moment, this iconic moment in American history, helps us better understand that history, right? So another reason to study constitutional law is to better understand history, and then of course, to better understand current events. We just talked about the Perry v. Schwarzenegger case, right? This was decided this summer. This is going on now, right? The wheels of justice are turning, right, even as we study constitutional law in this class, right? So those are just a few reasons why we study constitutional law, why it's important. Another reason maybe become president, right? I mean, we all know that Barack Obama, also Bill Clinton, they both taught constitutional law early in their careers before they went into politics, right? We talked last week kind of about Christine O'Donnell, right? And how much an understanding of the Constitution is really necessary to participate in politics in this country, right? So just some of the reasons why it's important to study constitutional law. This is the big question, though. This fourth question, right, which is how do we figure out what the Constitution means, right? How do we interpret the Constitution? So constitutional law is simply a fight over what the document means, right? How do we actually engage in that fight? What weapons do we have in that fight? What tools do we bring to that fight, right? And we know that there are three basic tools, right, that we've talked about in this class, right? They are text.
Just pardon the interruption. At this time, all our staff, they're meeting in 237.
Okay, great. All right, so we know that there are three tools that we use, right, to interpret the Constitution, right, primarily, right? The first is text. That is, what does the Constitution actually say? What words does it use? What language does it use, right? Sometimes we can get an answer as to what the Constitution means simply by looking at what it says. More often than not, though... Okay. All right. More often than not, right, it's not going to be that helpful, right? What we really need is to look at the legislative intent, right? That is, to look at what the framers wanted these provisions to achieve. I know that this is a little distracting. Let's just try and focus. This is important to... Oh, okay, cool. Thank you. To get through this material. Right, so text, right? What does the Constitution say? Legislative intent. What were these provisions supposed to accomplish? And then the third thing, right, and this is the really important one in this class, precedent, right? That is, what do other courts think about this issue? What do other people think about this question? How have other people tried to answer the question that we're dealing with, right? So we're just going to do a quick example. We did this in class. But let's just kind of apply these three things to this easy example, right? The no smoking sign, right? Let's apply our three tools to figure out what it means. We know that just from the text, right, there are kind of two possibilities here, right? No smoking can either mean do not smoke cigarettes or do not set fire to yourself. Like, as in literally no smoking. You cannot literally smoke, emit smoke, right? So those are the two possibilities, right? I think we all know what the likely answer is in this case, right? But let's go ahead and apply our three tools to the sign so we can see how we get at that answer, right? So the first tool, right? Text, no smoking. That's literally what it says. Those are the words it uses. If we see this sign in a restaurant, that's not going to help us that much, right? Because no smoking, again, can mean two things. It can mean, do not smoke cigarettes, or it can mean do not spontaneously combust in the middle of the restaurant, right? It's vague, it's unclear, right? Legislative intent, though, helped us out here, right? What did the person who put up the sign, what did the person who made the sign, who wrote the sign, what did they intend for it to mean? And most of the time, we're going to find out they probably intended the cigarette meaning, don't smoke cigarettes, right? It's pretty obvious, right? If we go to precedent, it becomes even more obvious, right? We find out, what do other people think this sign means, right? Ask your average person on the street, ask 1 million people on the street, 99.9% of them are going to say, well, that clearly means no smoking, right? So that's kind of the equivalent of precedent. How do other people interpret this, right? So that's basically, those are the four questions. That's the section on the basics. That's very straightforward. I want you all to know that because it will, there will be questions about that on the midterm. I think there'll be easier questions. This is all kind of just very basic review. What is a constitution? What is constitutional law? Why study constitutional law? And then the big question here, how do we figure out what the Constitution means, right? Okay, great. So we can go on and cross off the basics from our list. Let's move on to section 2, architecture of the document.